All right, welcome back, everybody, to the next episode of Lessons from Terrible Students. As always, we are the Terrible Students. My name is Jeremy. That's Sarah. Sarah, say hello.
Hello, everybody.
So today we are going to be talking about leadership training. Now, what we're going to be talking specifically today is the different types of leadership training and a couple of topics on how leadership training should be changing here post-COVID and as some new generations come into the workforce. So we'll get into all of that here in a little bit. But first, as always, this podcast is brought to you by Lumius. At Lumius, we are your partner in learning. So let's get down into the thick of this. As always, I typically want to try and start with some type of personal anecdote, some type of embarrassing story. And usually that is at my expense. So here we go. I have typically been, I've never been in a leadership role. I have always been an individual contributor, as they say. So in the corporate world, typically there are kind of two facets of corporate life. So there are, in general, you are a people leader. So those are the people that you run a team, you have people reporting to you, things like that. And then there are individual contributors like myself. So I don't have anybody reporting to me. I have my projects that I run. I have my things that I need to do. But essentially, I am in control of what my goals are. Usually. So I don't have to worry about other people doing their job. I just have to worry about doing my job to the best of my ability most of the time, and things will work out. With people leaders, it's a little bit different. So when you come into leadership, a lot of the times your goals are based on what your team is able to accomplish. So your job changes somewhat. Your job goes from what you are able to accomplish to what your team is able to accomplish.
Yep.
That is the crux of the issue of why myself, I have never wanted to be in a leadership role. I don't want to be responsible for other people and their actions. Now, that being said, my personal anecdote is I have worked for some of what I view as some of the best leaders and also probably what I would view as some of the worst throughout my career as an individual contributor. And I'm not going to call any of them out or anything like that. As we talk through this, I'll reference some things and kind of go through what I thought were some good tendencies and bad tendencies in these leaders. But, personal anecdote being, I started my career as people that have listened to other episodes, I started my career as an installation technician, which is kind of an in the field, very different position than corporate life. And this was my first job. I was kind of shocked at how leadership in that particular role, in that particular location, and how those individual contributors, those technicians, how they talk to each other, because it was rough. Let's be nice about it. It was very, there were cuss words, there was yelling, but at the end of it, there was no like disciplinary action. There was no, like, everybody got their feelings out and work went on and it went forward. Like, unless you really did something that you shouldn't have done, you weren't documented, anything like that. So it was an interesting dichotomy to me looking back on it now of, okay, yeah, like these guys were standing in the office, like screaming at each other, and then nothing happened. Obviously now I know that's a problem because of, everybody else looking that dictates an issue. And this was, I'm 39 years old. I know this is for all those younger people coming in. That's old, guys. I've been in the workforce for a few years now. So back then it was a little different workforce. So it wasn't looked at as nearly as kind of a fireable offense, I think, as it is now. So
for sure.
Yeah. So that's kind of, and we'll go into kind of some of those changes and things like that. But that's my personal anecdote is when I came in to begin with, that was kind of my first exposure to the supervisor individual contributor relationship. Was, just hash it out, get in there and go at it.
Say what you have to say. No hard feelings afterwards. Sometimes.
Spoiler alert, don't do that, guys and girls. Do not do that at all. It's terrible. It's a terrible lesson to learn. Don't do that. So
what a great first example for you from a leadership perspective.
Right?
Yeah, totally.
So that's so I'm gonna put you on the spot, and we didn't talk about this before, but I'm gonna put you on the spot. So what was as you came into the working world, not necessarily your first manager, but what was your first kind of exposure to that relationship between supervisor / leader and individual contributor?
So I have kind of an interesting, journey personally, because I spent so many years in the service industry, right? I started serving and waiting tables at 15. And I bartended and waited tables until I was around 27. So I had about 12 years in the service industry. I loved pretty much every single leader, every boss I ever had in the service industry, but it was a completely different dynamic, right? Like a lot of the folks that were my managers were people I either came up through the ranks with and they were, promoted, or even if we didn't come up together, they were cool. They were service industry people. They were my people, for the most part. And I will say that I don't know how it is now, but and maybe I was really fortunate for a lot of years to work for good people that were willing to, roll their sleeves up and be in the weeds with us. And there was a lot of mutual respect there. So I've heard nightmare stories about working for people in the service industry that are not like that. I think they probably have an incredibly high turnover, especially with the world the way it is today. People don't have patience for it. They're not doing it. Right. And so, so my experience there was great. Yeah, I was really good friends with a lot of my bosses. So when I came into corporate America later than most people, I also got really lucky and had really amazing leaders. If anything, what was a little difficult for me was having such strong, really awesome, I had female leaders, right, for the first several years, for the majority of my start into corporate America. And they were women that I respected, who cared about me and my growth and my development. And I still talk with them today. I'm still in touch with all of them today. They're mentors to me. And so I was really lucky in that regard. I think what was difficult was years later going into positions where I didn't have great leadership and learning how to navigate that and understanding that, like, oh, even working in the same company, same culture, right? Just moving leadership and realizing that not every leader is going to be as amazing as the next. And so that was more of a rough wake-up call for me, I think, especially because I was working for the same company where I had such great leadership. So, and again, I've been lucky to kind of like, just a few bumps in the road over the years, brief stints with people, maybe filling in as just leaders for a little while, whether that was because another leader left or was promoted. But I've been really lucky, Jeremy. I've had really good leaders in my for the majority of my my experience in corporate America, and I don't know that that's everyone's experience.
I can tell you it's not. It's
yeah.
I think I'm probably about half and half, honestly.
Yeah.
I've had some really good ones, and I've had some. I've had one or two that were really, really bad, and then I've had a couple that were just kind of there.
So I think that's. Yeah, I think that's more so. Even the leaders I had that weren't great, it was more because they just weren't there. They just weren't engaged. they were usually interim leaders, that were there just for the moment until a new leader was found. And um,
Yeah, and
yeah,
that's actually not a bad transition. So this episode, as we are a learning and development podcast, what I wanted to talk about this episode was kind of leadership training in general. What does that mean, and what are some of the topics that we view should be trained to leaders? So first of all, I want to dive into what leadership training actually means, because for me, that kind of means three different things. It means three different audiences. So first, leadership training means training your existing leaders. So people that are already in place, whether they've been there 20 years or 1 year, they're already in place running your team. They've gone through whatever introductory training for their new role, and it's existing leadership. So these are the people that you do still need to train these folks. There are trainings outside of like the annual compliance trainings that everybody has to take. There should still be some leadership training around these folks, primarily because exactly what we were just talking about. As people are enrolled for a while, it is hard to stay engaged for some. I know there are some that are intrinsically motivated, and they get satisfaction out of their job, and they're not going to kind of let it slide and all that kind of stuff, and that's fantastic. However, there are some that we need to make sure that we're engaging our workforce and ensure that we're training them not only on new trends and new concerns when it comes to leadership, but also policy changes
right.
and different concerns, societal concerns, different things that they're worried about. All of this kind of stuff is content for existing manager training. I think a lot of times as a businesses and as training development folks, we kind of get stuck in that new hire tendency of, okay, let's get them trained and then we're done. Like
And they're good. Yeah.
they're in the role, they're done. That's not the case. We need to ensure that they're continuing along this kind of career long path of learning to make sure that we can keep them engaged and keep them learning throughout their entire role.
Agreed. You're in my thought there is that you can always be a better leader. Always. There's always room. And you can always be better at your job, right? There's always room for improvement. And to your point, there are just so many things that change and shift over the years. And people have been leaders for 20, 30 years that have been really great leaders. We have a new, workforce, Gen Z coming in, and they're a different type of, we're all different types of people to have to lead. Millennials are different,
Yep.
People are different. So it's so important. And the other thing I just want to add really quick, because we talk about how it's usually new leaders, or whether you're new to a leadership role and you're going through leadership training, or you're new to a company and they're making you go through that leadership training because you're new to their company. The continuous education training is so important for leadership, and it is often overlooked. And that's it's a detriment to companies for sure. Especially, and even, throwing a once a year leadership training on the books, great. But what are you doing to do your checks and balances as leaders of leaders to make sure that people are actually being held accountable to the things they learned in these leadership trainings?
You know what? I'm going to kind of call that out a little bit, because I have worked on and participated in some of these kind of once a year annual.
Yes, very common.
I'm going to throw up the hand quotes for people that aren't like
Check
watching me on YouTube, the annual training sessions or whatever. Most of the time, that's not what they are. They bring everybody in from, if you're a nationwide company, they bring everybody into a central location. You run a couple of like group activities where you're like, okay, how can we improve this year or whatever? And you never hear anything about any of it for the rest of the year.
Right.
It's just kind of an excuse to say, yes, we did something, And then we've identified these issues, but from that point on, nothing is ever said or done of how to combat those issues. No training is developed on how to actually get around those issues. And then you all come together again and identify the exact same issues a year from the same date. I went through a couple of those where we literally did have the same bullet points almost 3 years running. And
Yep.
like eventually it was just like, okay, why am I coming to these? Like, there's no need for me to be here.
And that's
So
the same thought process of every other leader that is at that repetitive, monotonous training they were
yeah,
at last year.
I was on the training team at the time, so that's why I was there.
Mhm.
But so I wasn't like a leader in there. But if I was like a people leader, my thought would be, okay, why am I wasting my time here when we're doing the exact same thing? But
And that's
you know,
something we hear at Lumius as partners, as a
oh yeah,
vendor, when companies bring us on and say, hey, we need really good leadership training. Our people are not, it's just the same thing every year. They don't really take it seriously. And leadership training is, to me, it's one of the most important things to stress the value of why you are coming to this training and why it's important for you to maintain what you've learned and be held accountable to it. So,
right. And
yep.
ensuring that you have that follow up, like,
Yeah.
because there's only so much we can do as the training department. Like, we can help you identify these issues, we can help get it written down, notate, document it all to ad nauseum. But at the end of the day, it's on somebody's desk to make sure these things are actually followed up upon. So I think that's the other piece of the puzzle that sometimes doesn't get done is there's no follow up after these courses to ensure that these things are actually tackled properly. But that's another podcast episode. So
Right.
that is existing leadership training. The other part of leadership training, or the second part of leadership training, is for new managers. So let's say for some reason I decide that I do want to actually start being responsible for other people and I want to become a leader. So that's where I apply for the job. I get accepted for the role. So now I am running this new team. However, I have never been a people leader before. I have never been a manager, a supervisor, a director, senior manager, whatever the role is. It is new to me as far as leading people. So that's where leadership training comes in as well. So this is a few different things. So this includes all of the new systems that I'm going to need to learn as far as, setting goals, managing people's salaries, managing budgets, things like that. All of those kind of systems and day-to-day things of managerial life, of leadership. And I think that a lot of times I think that does get covered, maybe not as well as it needs to, but I think that's covered more than what I view as the more important piece, which is what I would refer to as the soft skills part of it,
Yeah.
which is how to have conversations and how to have tougher conversations, how to identify when somebody on your team is struggling, how to talk to that person when they are struggling. And when I'm trying to think of a nicer way to say this, but just how to treat people like people. Like I've been under some supervisors and some managers where I'm thinking, I don't know how to tell you to just be nice to people. Like, and that's like, I shouldn't have to tell you that whoever you're talking to and whoever you're speaking like this to is a person. That should always be first in your, they're not your subordinate. They're a person first. And that's where we need to lead from. And I feel like a lot of times that's what gets lost in a lot of new manager training. We do train them on, okay, this is how you approve time off. This is how you run a budget. We train them around the money stuff a lot of times, but I don't think we train them a lot around soft skills and dealing with the different things that you have to deal with when you're leading a group of people, because bad things happen, not
Sure.
just to you, but to people on your team. And you have to be ready for that. You have to be able to acknowledge when stuff happens outside of work, that it affects people inside of work. So, and I think from my experience, that's a lot of times what I've seen is people unwilling to acknowledge the fact that something like this employee is now has taken a downturn in their productivity. They've, all of a sudden they're being snappy where they were, happy go lucky. They're showing up late, whatever, and they don't know how to deal with that. So their first knee jerk reaction is where I'm just going to give them documentation. Maybe that's not necessarily how you want to handle that situation. And again, it depends on your company's policies and all that kind of stuff. But for me,
But
it
a
always
good leader would ask the questions, care about their people, give them the opportunity. Not everyone's an open book. They don't always want to share that information, but understanding the importance of work-life balance and
exactly
how to be supportive. I agree.
Right. And I think that's a lot of where new manager training kind of doesn't cover. Yes, we absolutely do need to train them on the systems and the minutia and how to do the day-to-day pieces. But I do think there needs to be more soft skill training on how to identify when certain trends start popping up on your team, as far as, I've got people start showing up late. Why are they showing up late? Like what has changed? Is there something going on maybe that I don't know about? Some kind of social skills are something that I think you need to be able to understand as a people leader, because you're not leading machines or numbers. You're leading people. Stuff happens. So that's kind of what I view there. The other thing is they also need to know where they need to go for support, because it's not an easy job.
Oh no.
So, as a new manager, I feel like a lot of times, or a lot of what I've heard is, now I'm a new manager. My support system that I had were my peers. I can't go to them anymore. I'm now, I have to develop a different set of peers, because I can't go as if I'm promoted from that level, I cannot now go with my new concerns that I have at this level. I can't go back to my peers that I had and discuss these issues with them, because there may be some things that they can't know, that maybe information that I'm only privy to at this level that they're not. There may be some HR issues that they're not privy to, things like that. So developing a new support system is also crucial for new managers. So I think there should be some training around that, or just added at the end of who they can contact, what resources are available, things like that, because nobody works in a vacuum, I think is the key. Even new managers, you can't work in a vacuum. You have to be able to know who you can lean on. So that's my soapbox.
No, it's important, especially, it just like anybody coming into a new role, right? Needing somebody that they can rely on, a mentor or whoever. But also, I think what's important too, and we talk about these soft skills, but there's so much encompassed in leadership that is not something that you can learn overnight. A lot of it is learned through experience, but giving these leaders a toolbox to at least be prepared for when situations come up, right? Like new leaders, they don't always know how to prioritize things, right? They don't know how to have difficult conversations sometimes, especially, and what's really tricky is for new managers, when you have come up through the ranks with your team and all of a sudden you're promoted and you're managing your team.
Oof. Yeah, that's
and
rough.
That's rough. And I've seen it happen, and I've seen it not go well, and I've seen it go okay. I've seen it go well, and it just depends on how much that person was set up to lead their peers successfully. What does that transition look like? There's just so many different areas of being a good leader that are learned through experience, but we could be doing a better job setting up our new leaders for success. And that's where it is important, right, to have the continuous training, to have the new leadership training. But and I know we've talked about this before. personality tests, which I know are not your favorite. However, there is something to be said about learning your team's personalities, their strengths, what they bring to the table, and how you can help them grow those strengths and really shine. And so I think that's something that's also kind of ignored sometimes is and where new leaders kind of trip up when their team doesn't do things the way they would do it and they don't know
Yeah.
how to
Now,
manage to it.
you're right. For anybody that listened to our personality test episodes, I do have a bias against them. However, I will say I do approve of them as far as a team building component. So I don't mind them. Like if you have a new leader coming into a team, or if you have somebody that has been promoted from within to now lead that team, I do feel like there is some type of team dynamic that needs to be created, and there needs to be some kind of offsetting event, like get the team together for a day, get them out of their typical work cycle,
Yep.
and bring them together and do some kind of, okay, we're reintroducing us as this new team because there's been change, especially if you've been promoted from within. Not only do you have a new manager, now you've also got a new employee because assuming you're backfilling that position. So you've got two new people to these roles. So you should really have some kind of, okay, let's reevaluate what this team looks like, where those responsibilities lie, and how we work with each other. And to be truthful, I'm okay with using those tests like that. I think that's what they're designed to be used for. So yeah,
when you're using it for that, agreed.
Yeah, that's good. Now, most of leadership training focuses on those two kind of audiences: the existing training or existing leadership training and new leadership training. However, there is one other group that a lot of times is not really addressed, and those are prospective leaders. So let's say that, again, I am looking to become a leader. I already have the necessary amount of time in role. I already have knowledge of my role and what I need to be doing, and I'm doing that role every day. So I notified my supervisor, manager, director, whoever that is, hey, I would like to become a people leader. I want to take the next step. I want to be somebody that is, driving forward and helping manage people to do better, things like that. So that's where we call them prospective leaders. So I think there's also a way to develop training for those folks to already start kind of learning some of these things. Now, they won't have access to a lot of that software and things like that. So that's not what I'm talking about. But again, the soft skill training, the identifying tough conversations, how to have those tough conversations, things like that. I think all of that kind of stuff falls into what can be classified as this prospective manager training, as well as kind of learning about different departments within the company. I think that's something else that prospective managers can do, because once you become a people leader, not only will you have to manage your team, you also have to manage how your team interacts with the other teams within your company. So you kind of become a little bit more visible to everybody else within the company. So there's an expectation that you kind of understand how the machinery of your company works. So that's another piece of prospective management training that can be sliced.
That's a good idea, actually. You're just making me think about, I don't think I've ever worked for a company that had prospective manager training, but also how awesome would it be to give these people the opportunity to not just get like, hey, you are on this path, this clear path, and you have, shared that leadership is something that you want to grow and develop into. That's great. Like, let's get you started on the training, but also let's make sure that you really want to be a people leader, right? Yeah. So it's almost like twofold. You're getting them prepared to be leaders, but also giving them visibility into what a leader really means. It's not just being the boss. Like, that sounds good. there's more money involved. That's awesome. However, here's all the other things that come with leadership. And how many times have you seen somebody go into leadership for them 6 months later to be like, I changed my mind.
Yeah, right.
I want my old role.
I did not realize this.
Yes,
Yeah.
100%. How, and that would be actually a really great idea that I think more companies should start doing.
Yeah, when I was an instructional designer, it was in my first instructional design job. It was about 2 years after I started. I was in a one-on-one with my manager, and we were talking, and I was trying to schedule some time with him, and we were trying to figure out when he was available, and he spun his laptop around so that I could see his schedule. That's when I realized I didn't want to be a manager anymore. Up to that point, that's because that's just in corporate America. You think, okay, I'm just going to keep climbing. I'm going to keep climbing. I'm going to keep climbing. That's kind of that mentality, right? Is you always want to make more. You always want to do more. But I saw his schedule, and it was just completely blue. There was no break in his schedule at all, and I got stressed out looking at his schedule.
Like, just looking at this makes my eye twitch, and I'm itchy. No.
Like, when do you even have a moment to stop and think? Like, he goes, yeah, I don't. I think when I get home. I'm like, man, that's crazy. So I think that was kind of a defining moment for me when I realized, hey, like I enjoy what I'm doing right now. I like talking to people, but I also like having portions of my schedule where I'm working on something, I'm developing something, I'm making something, and I don't have to talk to anybody. A lot of times when you go into leadership positions, what you're doing is you're driving the ship, right? But you can't do that by yourself. So you're meeting with all these other people, and you're directing them or managing them and telling them to go somewhere. You can't do that by yourself. So you're talking to people, and you're meeting with people, and whew, yeah,
it's exhausting.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, it's something where you got to know. I think it would be helpful to know what you're getting into before you get that role, because you're right. If you're in role for 6 months and you're like, man, I really don't want to do this, and you step back down, good for you for realizing that and being strong enough to say, hey, this isn't on me. This is not what I want to do. I want to go back to doing what I was doing. Hopefully you can do that and be able to demote back to what you were doing. Good on you for identifying that and putting your mental well-being first. But now you've put additional stress on your team because they got to find somebody else to fill that role again. They got to go through that entire process all over again, which is not ideal. So,
right. And yeah. I'm also going to refer to another podcast we did called Failing Forward. And are companies really okay with failing fast? And to me, this is an example of that. Like, is a company going to say, look, if you're not happy in this role, that's fine. We'll put you back or whatever. Sometimes that's not even an option. But are they really okay with that? Are they really okay? Is there going to be no judgment? I don't know.
We try to be honest on this podcast. For me, I would, like I said, I would probably say, you know what? Good for you.
Oh, me too, for sure.
Put your mental health first. However, I could also see many people going, you knew what you were coming into. Why are you telling me this now? Why are you putting this back through? And you know what? This is a good point to go back to treating people as people, putting yourself in their situation. Because if somebody's coming to you with this type of kind of mental health issue, because when they're doing this from a leadership perspective, it's not that they physically can't do the job. It's not, hey, I'm not strong enough to do this. I can't lift this box. I can't drive this forklift. It's, hey, this mental load is too much for me. My work-life balance is shifting way past what I'm comfortable with. I'm not okay with that. And we are just now getting to a place where I think that's acceptable. And the reason I'm expounding on this is going into our next topic. So this is actually a really good transition. And Sarah, this is why very happy that you joined me on this podcast. Um, so, I think it's changing. The situation around these kind of things are changing now,
Yep.
post 2020.
Yep.
To where before, if you were to go into a new position, 6 months in, whatever, a lot of times there is like a grace period, be that 90 days, six
Right.
months, whatever it is. But that grace period is not for you to go, I don't want to be here.
Right.
Grace period is usually for the employer to go, yes or no, do I like this person in that role? And then if not, you're not guaranteed that they're holding your old role for you. It's okay, you're allowed to now reapply somewhere else, or we'll slot you somewhere else within the company as close to the same level as you were as possible. If we as the company deem that you're not able to do this role, if you as the individual deem that you're not able to do this role, I'm sure a lot of companies handle it differently. I would like to think that there would be some kind of, I don't know, some kind of compassion there. But maybe that's me being naive. I don't know. You're right. It's a good question. How would, and that would be up to each individual senior people leader, whoever is the leader above that person, of how they would handle that. Would they be angry at this person? Would they be supportive of that person, or what? And the big question is, would it cap their career at that company? Like, would it then say, okay, if you're going back down, just know that you're never going to go higher than the level we're about to put you at, because of the thing that you're doing right now, because of identifying this and stepping back down. Are you now blacklisted, for lack of a better term? I know it's kind of a naughty term nowadays, but are you put on this list of, will that kind of follow you around every time you apply, once you feel like you are ready at that point?
Or to move into another individual contributor role that's still a step up. I think a lot of it comes back to culture. I think company culture plays a huge role in it. I think if, it's coming from the top down, and that's something that an example set by C-suite and executive leadership, that most of your trickle down is going to be similar.
Right.
But you just, it depends. And there are people that have been leaders for a very long time who are kind of stuck in their ways, that have that if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality. We've all worked for those people or known those people. And so I think a lot of it does come down to culture, but I think we are living in a time where companies are going to have to, either, if they're not already there yet, you're going to have to get with it, understand the importance of mental health. So many companies are doing these awesome things, like giving people mental health days outside of their, their allotted regular vacation. So I do think that it is on leadership's mind that it would be more acceptable today than it would have been 20 years ago. That would have been probably very frowned upon, taking a position and then deciding it's not for you.
Yeah, and let's expound on that a little bit, because there is a very big reason why it's more acceptable today than it was 20 years ago, or even 5 years ago, right?
Yeah.
2020 was such a transformative year for the workforce in America. I don't think it can be overstated how the workforce changed due to COVID primarily, and the other social issues that came up in 2020. Now, I am not an expert on either of these, other than having worked in the corporate world at that time. So specifically, I want to talk about how kind of COVID changed how the workforce viewed themselves, and how the workforce viewed the leadership. And I think a lot of it kind of focuses on the term that they used for who had to keep working through COVID. So they coined this term of essential workers, right?
Mhm.
So when COVID happened in 2020, and I'm sure everybody listening to this podcast was probably in the working world in 2020. So everything had to shut down. Like, you were not allowed to go into the office. We weren't allowed to congregate. We weren't allowed to go back to the office. Anybody that could be remote had to be remote. If you could not be remote, then you were separated into these two different categories. You were either an essential worker or a non-essential worker. So essential workers were allowed to continue to go to work. They had to, wear the mask. They had to do these things to that. I don't know if it was OSHA or I don't remember who exactly set down the safety protocols, but they had to do these things that the government said to be able to continue to go to work once these places were allowed to open back up. After, I think it was 3 months, if I remember right. But I think that empowered the workforce to where they're saying, okay, if I am so essential, why am I treated like I'm not?
Yeah.
And I think that was where a lot of it was, okay, if you're deeming me essential, if you're saying that I am so essential that I don't get the benefit of staying home through a worldwide pandemic,
Right.
and still getting my paycheck, still getting means to support myself and my family, I still have to go to work when my life is literally on the line because the vaccine had not been
Oh yeah.
brought
And
out.
everything was just very uncertain, unknown. A lot of people were dying. It was scary. Yeah, totally.
So that's kind of the background around, okay, these people are so essential that they still have to work through that fear. And it was the exact opposite of who our culture had viewed as essential prior to COVID. So I think a lot of what the change was, it's okay. And I think this is something that a lot of us knew already, that without the folks running the drive-throughs, ringing up your groceries, bagging your groceries, working at restaurants,
Drugstores.
drugstore. Yeah. Without these folks, without these hourly, most of the time, minimum wage
Minimum
folks,
wage. Yep.
which at the time in North Carolina where I lived was $7.25.
$7.25 an hour. It's technically, isn't that still the minimum wage?
Yeah. State mandated minimum wage, I think it's still $7.25. Most companies at this point have realized they're not going to hire anybody.
No. Yeah, 100%.
So it's come up from that. But yeah, state mandated is still $7.25, I think, but nobody hires at that anymore as far as I know. And I think that's what, I think that COVID giving that classification of, okay, if we're so essential, treat us like we're essential. And I think it gave power to the worker to say, okay,
it did.
I know that I'm essential now. You've told me that I'm essential. You have told me that you cannot operate without my role. And it got to the point where a lot of people were going to stay home regardless. So the workforce dried up because the reason that we were treating these people as if they were not essential is because there was always another body to put there. Like, okay, you don't want to come to work at $7.25 an hour? Fine. This person over here will. We don't need you here because this person over here will come in and work for $7.25 an hour. Now they won't. So that was kind of the 1-2 punch of workers realizing, hey, this is kind of what's happening. We're coming to work, risking our lives coming to work for $7.25 an hour. No thanks.
What we're talking about right now is what I like to call the silver lining of the pandemic for service industry folks.
Yeah.
And while it bothered so many people, like, oh, there's nobody at Burger King to, serve me my lunch today. And I'm like, well, maybe if we actually started and this isn't just leadership, right? This is like, there was a whole movement. And
Yeah.
personally, I was proud of it. Like, we're not treating service industry folks like crap anymore. Thank
Yeah.
goodness.
And it came down to, okay, have you ever worked a service industry job? I personally have not.
Yes.
Once I left outside of being a technician, which is, I guess, technically a service career. But when I was in high school, I flipped burgers. I was a
Yep.
bagger, I was a stocker. Like, I did that stuff part-time when I was in high school and college. Once I left college, I was an installation technician, which is technically, I guess, a service position, but I feel like is not quite the same. Because I didn't quite deal with the same amount of abuse that retail service people deal with, sometimes on a daily basis. Like, and you really don't know the type of abuse those people get until you work that job. Like, you can hear the stories, but until you're standing behind that counter getting yelled at and having stuff thrown at you, you don't understand.
Yep.
Like, and you're standing there thinking, okay, I can't do anything about this, or my kids can't eat next week.
Yep. Yeah. No, it was definitely the silver lining of the pandemic for service industry folks. No more abuse from leadership, no more abuse from people in general, and also, the corporations who own these companies actually paying people a livable wage, which
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where the training, because I start to feel like corporate America is trying to kind of, quote unquote, right itself back to pre-COVID lines. And I don't think that they're going to be able to do that without alienating a good chunk of the workforce. And I feel like that's where leadership training comes in, is where we have to make sure that for existing trainers, or not trainers, existing leadership, new leadership, prospective leadership, that they understand that these changes in culture happen.
Yep.
Outside of your company, outside of everything else. These changes happen, and as companies and as corporations, we can't change that. We have to adapt and change with those changes. We can't stand in the way of that progress, because if we do, it's not going to turn out well for us. So we have to be able to adapt to the culture changes. And I think, COVID changed so many things. I think this is one of the things that it did as far as the workforce, is it provided a way for these people to realize what their worth actually was. And you're right. I don't view that as a bad thing. So that's just kind of my opinion. The other kind of side from that is it also let a lot of people realize that their job could be a work from home job, a remote job.
Oh,
And
for sure.
I know that's something that they're trying to kind of,
that's another podcast, Jeremy.
That is we won't go into deep on that, because I can talk a whole hour about work from home versus returning to the office. But
yes,
the other thing, the last point I wanted to make, and the last kind of topic I think would make a very good topic for leadership training for our three identified audiences are new generations coming into the workplace.
Yes.
And there's two kind of different ways that I see this. First is the most obvious, and this is something that every generation has talked about for as long as I can remember, and that's the new generation. Now it's Gen Z, right? It was us as millennials coming into the workforce. Now it's Gen Z coming into the workforce. They're aging up. They're graduating college, graduating high school, and coming into the workforce, and they have their own set of values and what they expect, which may be different than what we as millennials, what Generation X, and what baby boomers view as practical,
100%.
Values. The key is that's their values. Like your value set at that point in your life they're probably set. They may waver a little bit, from different life experiences, things like that. But at that point in your life, I feel like whatever your core values are, they're kind of set, so they're not going to change. So I don't feel like forcing whatever our values are as millennials, as Gen X, as baby boomers, forcing that on the new generation is not the way to go. And if any audience understands this, it's us as millennials, because
Sure.
for the past 20 years, we have been blamed for everything. I mean, we take it down every industry, from
Yes.
restaurant to music to MTV. We have literally been blamed for every single thing. So if there's any generation that can understand being unfairly blamed for demolishing capitalist society, it is the millennials. And it drives me crazy because I see people my age, millennial age folks, and to be fair, and I hate this term, but this is the term, and Sarah, I'm sorry.
Elder millennial. Is that what you're about to say?
It's called geriatric millennials.
Okay, you just took it a step too far. Could we just stick with elder? How about elder millennial? Let's get rid of that word.
Elder millennials. I've seen people our age
do the
doing
same thing to Gen Z.
Yes. And I've stopped and I've said, look, you're doing the exact same thing that was done to us 10 years ago.
Yeah.
15 years ago. Like when we came into the workforce, we had our set of values. We had the ways that we wanted to work. And we were immediately stopped from working that way and denied what we thought was important by the people that were already in the workforce, and told that that's not how it's going to be.
Yeah.
And we hated that. So why are we doing that to the next generation of folks? Why are we not stepping up behind them and saying, yes, I agree with this. Let's do that. Let's try to make this change. Let's try to make this better, instead of saying, you know what? I had it bad, so I want you to have it bad too.
Because we're hypocrites, Jeremy. That's why we're the millennials. No.
I've never understood, I had it hard, so I want you to have it hard too. I don't understand that mindset of my early career or my childhood or whatever.
Right.
I had to go through the struggle.
I suffered. You should too. Yeah. That's a mindset that we all need to get rid of. And I will just say this, as we're talking about this, it's reminding me, I have done previously worked on leadership training that included an activity where they talked about the different generations, what each generation, their strengths, what they bring to the table, some of their mindsets, like the baby boomers being extra loyal, staying with companies 20, 30 years. Millennials stopped doing that. We started, saying like, I know what I bring to the table. What can you do for me? Right. And that was viewed as bad. We've talked about that in another podcast as well. But my point being here is, as far as leadership training goes, I feel like there is a place at the table for all leadership training for every single company that has people across this broad spectrum of, we've got baby boomers, we've got Gen X's, we've got millennials. For the most part, I think baby boomers are probably starting to retire, right? Or if they're not already retired.
Yeah,
but
I'm not sure what the years are, but I
got lifers. right. But either way,
most are approaching retirement age, and if they're able to, unfortunately, some don't have the savings.
Right.
If they're able to, I would assume they're approaching that retirement age. Yeah.
But what a great exercise and activity to do in a leadership training is to learn about the different generations, what they bring, and then interact with each other, do some activities, like get that. Remind people why these different generations bring different strengths and what they are, and how they're not always a bad thing. So
exactly, and these things,
room for that,
and these things change. Like our entire corporate career, it was always viewed as like baby boomers up here in like the C-suite. You had Gen X as kind of your managers, and then millennials were down here as kind of your grunt workers, right?
Yep.
Or individual contributors, or whatever you want to say.
And the
Now
technical.
that's changing. Like
Yep.
more millennials have longer in their role. They're moving into leadership positions.
Yep.
There are, more of people our age of that millennials kind of moving into management, senior management, and even those C-suite level kind of things. So that's why it kind of pokes my nerve that now we're looking down on Gen Z for their tendencies instead of saying, well, what positives does it bring to the table? How
What can we learn?
Exactly. Like, let's learn from our past instead of repeating it. I know that's a crazy thought, but let's give it a shot. Let's let's see if we can change it here, and actually remember how we were treated when we came into the workforce. Because I remember sitting in an HR meeting, and it was all of HR. So everybody was in a big auditorium, and the head of HR was standing up at the front of the room, and he was talking. And I kid you not, he went on a 10-minute rant about how millennials are terrible. At least half the room are millennials. And I'm just sitting here staring at this guy like, dude, you don't even know who you're talking to.
Read the room, sir.
This tone deaf and be the head of HR and bad mouthing half of your workforce. Like, it's just ridiculous. And I'll even remember the question. He was asked about a work from home question, and then he went off on a tangent about how millennials don't like to work. Like, who? What? So, I mean, it's just something to where I don't want to see us repeating the same mistakes and trying to beat down the next generation who are coming in with a different set of values and a different set of morals than we had. Because that's how it always works. And whatever the next generation after them is, whatever that ends up being called, hopefully we can break this cycle and they're not going to treat those folks like that, whether it's generation AA or Gen New or whatever the term is going to be for after Gen Z, or if it's already been coined, I don't know it. I apologize to all of the, 5-6-year-olds, whatever the new generation is. Okay. Yeah. So we're getting to the point where we can't blame older generations anymore. It's not, hey, it's Gen X, there's nothing we can do about it. Hey, it's the baby boomers, there's nothing we can do about it. We're getting to the point where we're moving into those roles where there is something that we as millennials can do about it. We can make this change. We're moving into these roles where we have the power to make strong, lasting change. We just have to be able to stop and look at ourselves and identify where we're making the same mistakes as our predecessor and then not make those mistakes. Yeah. And I think that's what the key of it is, to be able to realize how we were treated and change that behavior so the next generation is not treated like that. And I think that's where the training can step in, because I think it just takes that one aha moment of, oh, you're right. Like, it would just take a scenario of showing millennials this, because I think all millennials have had this same experience, because we've been blamed for literally everything our entire lives. So
at this point, I'm used to it. I don't care anymore. No, but you're absolutely right. There's so much goodness that really can come from leadership training that can encompass so many different things. The soft skills piece, the empathy piece. Although I will say there are some behaviors that are innate that can't be trained. Also another day, another conversation. But it's just invest in your leadership training and maintain it. That's the message.
Exactly right. And that is a good message to go out on. We appreciate it, everybody. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.